The moment her pearl-white SUV sank into the mud pit, tilting like a wounded ship, I knew the message had finally landed. Vanessa Bloom stood ankle-deep in muck, staring at the wreckage of her shortcut with fury in her eyes and manure at her feet. She had trespassed one time too many, and my land had just answered back. If you've ever owned land, really owned it, not just a fenced-in backyard or a postage stamp lot in suburbia, but land that breathes with the rhythms of cattle seasons and sunrise chores, then you know what it means to feel a place in your bones. That was Sagebrush Hollow to me. 110 acres of pasture oaks and creeks tucked into the rolling edge of the valley, passed down from my grandfather to my father, and now to me, Ethan McAllister, age 59, and proud steward of every rock, rut, and ridge. It was quiet out here, peaceful, at least it used to be. That peace shattered the day Meadowstone Ridge popped up like a slick prefab mushroom colony on the western edge of my property line. Some developer with a taste for cheap vinyl siding and overpriced HOA rules had carved out a cul-de-sac where deer used to run fencing in an instant community of yoga decks, manicured turf, and neighbors who couldn't spell barbed wire, let alone respect it. And at the helm of their ship, Vanessa Bloom, 47, sharply dressed, driving a pearl-white SUV that could crush a Prius for breakfast and still have room for brunch. She had the kind of face that looked permanently unimpressed, like life hadn't yet delivered anything worthy of her presence. When she wasn't patrolling the HOA with her clipboard and passive-aggressive smile, she was blazing down my ranch access road like it was her God-given right. The first time I saw her, I didn't even know who she was. I was mending the old cattle fence just past the Oaks when that oversized SUV rumbled off the HOA cul-de-sac tires, crunching gravel like it was a red carpet. She slowed as she rolled up beside me, window sliding down with the kind of smooth hush that says I paid extra for that. "Is this a through road?" she asked, not a hint of curiosity in her voice. It wasn't a question, it was a challenge. I set down my fence tool and wiped sweat from my brow. "No, ma'am. This here's private ranch property. Only access for livestock maintenance and equipment." The road back there, I motioned toward the cul-de-sac loops back to the county highway. She gave a tight-lipped smile, the kind that made you feel like you'd failed some unspoken etiquette test. "Right," she muttered, and without so much as a nod, she gunned the SUV forward, bouncing down my track like I wasn't even there. I stood there stunned as her vehicle kicked up dust and cattle turned their heads. Surely I thought it was a one-time thing. Maybe she was lost. Maybe she was new. Maybe she didn't realize what she'd done. I was wrong. Dead wrong. Over the next few days, Vanessa's SUV became a fixture. Morning, afternoon, early evening, every time I turned around, her shiny chariot was cutting across my pasture road like it belonged there. Deep tire ruts began scarring the dirt, upsetting the drainage I'd worked years to perfect. The cattle started drifting further downhill to avoid the noise and movement. I tried the polite route first. I hammered in a thick wooden post and mounted a bright red private property, no trespassing sign at the trailhead. For good measure, I added another beneath it, agricultural access only. Seemed pretty straightforward. 48 hours later, both signs vanished. Gone. Not bent, not broken. Just removed like they were never there. But I found the evidence, a splintered shard of red-painted wood lodged in the creek bed, a quarter-mile off the edges, crushed under tire tracks. Hers, no doubt. The next morning, I parked my truck near the trail entrance just after sunrise and waited. Like clockwork, that pearl-white SUV appeared heading straight for the path. I stepped out into the sun and waved her down. "Ma'am," I said, keeping my tone even but firm, "we need to have a real conversation about this road." She rolled down her window halfway as if I were contagious. "Oh, this again," she said, eyes shielded by designer sunglasses. "You've made your point, Mr. McAllister," I replied. "This is private property. It's not for public use and certainly not for daily commuting. You're damaging my land, spooking livestock, and ignoring clear signage." Her laugh was small but sharp. "Oh, come now. The HOA president, Gregory Trent, he said it looked like an old access road. And it's so much more convenient than looping back to the county line. You can't seriously expect us to take that extra 10 minutes. Gregory Trent doesn't own this land," I said, my voice tightening. "I do. And neither he nor anyone else in that neighborhood has the right to use this road." "Well," she said with a little snort, "you're being quite unneighborly, aren't you? Hoarding all this space while the rest of us try to build a sense of community. And with that, she drove off tires, throwing dirt across the fender of my truck as she powered through my land like it was part of some HOA expansion plan. That was the moment I knew the sheriff would have to get involved. When Deputy Halverson arrived, he was sympathetic but noncommittal. "It's a gray area," he said. "She claims she's seen county vehicles use that road. Because I lease it to the county twice a year for fence inspections," I explained. "But there's no public easement." "I hear you, Mr. McAllister. But unless you catch her in the act, and unless she causes real damage or injury, well, you know how stretched we are these days." I knew. And Vanessa knew too. That smug grin she wore when she passed me on her fourth joyride of the week made it clear she felt untouchable. Gregory Trent was no help either. When I called him, his tone was coated in thin politeness. "I understand your frustration, Ethan, but perhaps there's been a miscommunication. These kinds of access roads often become shared without formalities. It's more of a community understanding." "It's a ranch," I said flatly. "Not a park, not a shortcut. You all built next to it, not on top of it." "Well," he said with a tight chuckle, "let's all just try to get along. I'll mention it at the next HOA meeting." I hung up before I said something I'd regret. That night I stood on the porch with my coffee staring out over the pasture that had once been my sanctuary. Now it was a thoroughfare for entitlement, a corridor of noise and trespass. I could feel the legacy of my family pressing on me like a weight. My grandfather had worked this land with calloused hands and quiet dignity. My father fought off developers with grit and paperwork. And here I was letting some woman with an expensive lease and a bad attitude carve ruts through our history. That's when the idea began to form. Not out of vengeance, but resolve. If the sheriff wouldn't stop her and the HOA wouldn't respect me, I'd have to make the point myself. Not with fists, not with confrontation, but with planning, with precision, with the kind of slow, thorough resolve that builds fences, runs irrigation, and raises cattle. I didn't want a war, but I was ready to draw a line. And this time I wasn't just going to post signs. I was going to make damn sure Vanessa Bloom learned what no trespassing really meant. Not with words, but with earth rock thorns and a touch of old-school country resistance. Sagebrush Hollow was about to get a few new upgrades, and Vanessa was about to find out the hard way that out here we don't play HOA politics. We play by the land. The thing about ranchers like me is we don't go looking for fights. We mend fences, we raise our cattle, and we prefer the quiet rhythms of honest work over courtroom drama or neighborhood politics. But once you cross a line, and I mean really cross it well, we don't back down. And Vanessa Bloom had driven a pearl white SUV straight across that line figuratively and literally too many times to count. After that last confrontation, her condescending tone, her talk of community spirit while plowing through my land like it was a strip mall parking lot, I stood on the porch of Sagebrush Hollow and made up my mind. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to threaten. I was going to plan. Because out here we don't argue with entitlement. We outthink it. So that very weekend I paid a visit to Cliff Harmon, my neighbor of 30 years, and a retired county surveyor who knew more about land rights than the courthouse itself. Cliff's place was a weathered bungalow cluttered with topographic maps, rusted survey stakes, and the smell of old tobacco. I laid it out for him over 2 mugs of percolated coffee. He listened, nodding slowly, his thick gray brows furrowed with each mention of Vanessa's SUV and Gregory Trent's spineless HOA diplomacy. "Sounds like classic suburbia meets country arrogance," Cliff grunted. "She thinks that HOA badge gives her a county crown." "Exactly," I said. "She doesn't see Sagebrush Hollow as a legacy, just a shortcut. I want to fix that. Legally, permanently." He leaned back in his chair, fingers tapping a folded plat map. "We'll start with boundaries. Resurvey the western line. Paint every stake bright orange. Make it so obvious even a blind possum couldn't miss it. Then we make that road of yours the kind of shortcut she'll never want to take again." I like the sound of that. And so Operation Thorn Trail was born. Over the course of the next few days, Cliff and I walked every inch of the western boundary. He brought out his old theodolite and stakes, and we verified every line down to the inch. Every marker we found we reinforced. The old wooden posts gone. In their place, gleaming steel fence posts pounded deep into the soil, each topped with bright orange paint and tagged with reflective private property tape. I ordered custom aluminum signs online, Private property, no trespassing. Agricultural use only bold and impossible to ignore. I didn't stop at one. I installed them every 50 feet from the cul-de-sac entrance to the far end of the pasture trail. Vanessa would have to be blind belligerent or both to miss them now. But the signs were just the start. If Vanessa wanted a shortcut, she was about to get the scenic route from hell. The next phase involved some good old-fashioned farm equipment. I hitched up my disc harrow, typically reserved for prepping the soil for seeding, and took it for a ride down the exact stretch she used. Only this time I dropped the discs deep into the dirt, carving out jagged furrows that turned her smooth shortcut into a choppy, bone-rattling mess. For my tractor, just a minor bump. For her SUV, a jarring wake-up call. Then came the rocks. Over the years, I'd cleared hundreds from the fields and stacked them behind the barn. Now they had a purpose. I picked the sharpest, most irregular stones, jagged edges, melon-sized weight, and began placing them strategically in the middle hump between tire tracks. I didn't make it obvious, just enough to guarantee a bad day for low-clearance street tires. I half-buried some tilted others at cruel angles. One wrong bounce and her fancy rims would look like they'd tangoed with a cheese grater. But I wasn't finished yet. Down near the bend in the path where runoff pooled after heavy rains, I spent a day with a shovel and pickaxe, gently deepening a natural dip in the earth. Then I diverted a portion of the overflow from the livestock tank via a small pipe, ensuring that even a light rain would turn that bend into a picturesque, wheel-sucking bog. And just beyond it, I used the front-end loader to spread a thick, gloppy layer of composting manure and hay. The muck heap. Every ranch has one. Mine had just found a new home. 50 feet of thick, wet, sticky mess that would coat the undercarriage of any vehicle fool enough to pass through it. It wasn't sabotage, it was fertilizer. Very natural, very legal, very inconvenient. And finally, the pièce de résistance thorns. I'd done some research. Blackthorn, honey locust, wild rose. Plants that grow fast, dense, and defensive. I bought dozens of saplings and planted them in tight rows along the shoulders of the track. Not enough to block access outright, but enough to slice up paint jobs and scratch hubcaps if she tried to veer off the roughened center path. I even added a few hidden patches of goat head burrs for good measure. She wanted nature, she'd get it. Every single modification was documented photos, videos, timestamps. I had copies of the survey receipts for the signage, even a notarized letter from Rachel Brannigan, my property rights attorney, confirming I was well within my rights to maintain and protect my land. Rachel found the entire ordeal unfortunately common and even a bit amusing. These suburban HOAs, she said, flipping through Vanessa's claims they're drunk on authority. But their rule books don't hold up against state property law. You're not booby-trapping your land. You're improving it. Still, she gave me one golden piece of advice: signage, signage, signage. So I doubled down. Added caution, uneven terrain signs. Not a through road in red. Enter at your own risk in black. It looked like the entrance to a construction site or a minefield. And that was the point. Let her try to claim ignorance. I even set up a discreet trail camera nestled in the oaks, angled perfectly at the path. If Vanessa came through again, I'd have it on film, the signs, the warnings, the condition of the road and her vehicle making a willful entry. That camera became my silent witness, and I checked it every morning with anticipation building in my chest. The days passed slowly, filled with ranch work and the occasional glance toward the cul-de-sac. I saw HOA residents walking their dogs, jogging, driving to town. But not Vanessa. Not yet. Maybe she'd gotten the message. Maybe she'd spotted the changes and reconsidered. But that wasn't her style. No, Vanessa Bloom didn't back down quietly. She was gathering steam, biding her time. I could feel it, and I was ready. One morning, as I was restacking hay bales near the barn, Cliff wandered up the gravel road, hands in his pockets, surveying the path with a slow grin. "You've built yourself a damn deterrent," he said. "Looks like a World War I trench met a botanical garden." I chuckled. "That's the idea." He slapped my shoulder. "Well, if she comes through that and still thinks she's in the right, I hope you got popcorn ready. It'll be a hell of a show." I didn't say it aloud, but I'd already cleared a spot on the porch with a perfect vantage point. Binoculars, thermos, camera batteries fully charged. The traps were set, the warnings were clear, and my land was prepared to defend itself. Vanessa Bloom wanted a shortcut. She was about to learn that some roads cost more than time. It happened on a Tuesday, of course it did. Nothing good ever starts on a Tuesday. The air was still damp from a light overnight rain, the kind that didn't soak deep, but left just enough moisture to activate every inch of that freshly tilled bog I'd engineered the week before. I'd been up early finishing chores and checking trail camera footage while sipping hot black coffee on the porch. Everything was ready. Everything was in place. The signs were crisp and bright. The rocks lay waiting jagged and innocent. The manure pile was perfectly spread like a welcome mat from hell. And the mud pit, God bless it, had bloomed into a full-blown quagmire, glistening like a trapdoor just waiting to snap. From my perch near the barn, I had a clear view of the track's western entrance. I'd mowed the field nearby just enough to keep a low profile, but still have a line of sight. Binoculars in hand, camera charge, phone set to record. I wasn't being paranoid, I was being prepared. And sure enough, just after 8:20 a.m., there it was. The pearl-white SUV turned the corner at the edge of Meadowstone Ridge and paused idling at the entrance of my access road like a queen preparing to make her triumphant return. I could picture her perfectly behind that windshield, sunglasses on expression, smug, utterly convinced the world revolved around her convenience. She inched forward, maybe scanning the new signs, maybe debating. For a second, I dared to believe she'd back off. But no. With a little rev of the engine and a defiant bounce, she pulled onto the path, barreling straight toward the gauntlet. I leaned forward, heart thumping, not with anger, but with cold, calculated anticipation. The first segment hit her hard. The deep furrows I'd cut with the harrow turned her smooth glide into a bucking rodeo. Her SUV pitched and jolted like a carnival ride gone wrong. She slowed down tires, whining suspension, groaning under the stress. Still, she pressed on. Then came the rocks. I watched through the binoculars as she tried to swerve, but couldn't find a clean line. One tire caught a stone just wrong. A metal-on-stone screech echoed across the field. Her front passenger side dipped with a nasty crunch, and I saw the whole vehicle lurch awkwardly before leveling out. I grinned. Phase 2 complete. But the best was yet to come. As she rolled into the bog zone, I saw her hesitate. She probably thought it was just a shallow dip. Probably figured she could power through. That was her mistake. She accelerated. The front wheels plunged in with a wet slap, instantly swallowed by soupy, unforgiving mud. The back wheels kicked up a spray of earth as they spun helplessly, gaining no traction. Her SUV sunk deeper, tilting slightly to the right as the passenger side disappeared into the muck. She was stuck. Beautifully, gloriously stuck. I grabbed the camera and zoomed in. She was yelling now at the dashboard, at her steering wheel, at the universe. She threw the car into reverse. Nothing. Just more spinning, more sinking. Then came the door slam. Vanessa stepped out, sinking up to her ankles in pure country revenge. Designer boots coated in mud. Hem of her pants soaking fast. And just ahead, the thick, ripe strip of manure stretched like a trench of humiliation. She stood for a moment, taking in the sight. I could only imagine what ran through her mind. Probably disbelief followed by rage and then slowly realization. This wasn't just a bad day. This was a message, and it had been delivered loud and clear. She stomped around the vehicle, hands flying, slipping twice in the muck. Then she yanked out her phone and started dialing. I assumed she called the sheriff first, then maybe the HOA, then likely a tow truck. Either way, she wasn't getting out of that pit on her own. I gave it about 15 minutes, long enough for her frustration to reach a proper boil, before I climbed into my truck and headed over the ridge. I approached slowly, carefully staying to the edge of the pasture. As I neared, she turned face red and furious fists clenched at her sides. "You!" she screamed. "You did this! This road was fine last week. Now it's a trap!" I stopped 20 feet away, got out, and leaned casually on the tailgate. "Morning, Miss Bloom. Looks like you ran into a bit of trouble. You sabotaged this road. You dug pits and buried rocks, and what is that smell?" She gagged, gesturing toward the manure field just ahead. I kept my expression neutral. "I've been doing some land maintenance, harrowing for cover crops, adjusting runoff for erosion control, and that smell prime fertilizer. Been composting for months. Good for the soil." "You set me up." "No, ma'am," I replied calmly. "I improved my land, and I posted signs, dozens of them, clear ones. You chose to ignore them. Again." She held up her phone like it was a badge. I'm calling the sheriff. You're going to pay for this. Already spoke with them, I said. And I've got everything documented. Photos, video, signed legal opinions. That trail camera I pointed to the oak tree behind her caught you driving past 3 signs this morning. You ignored all of them. As if on cue, a black and white cruiser rolled up the gravel and out stepped Deputy Rollins. He took one look at Vanessa's mud-anchored SUV inside. Morning, folks, he said. Guess we're back at it. Vanessa stormed over to him, unleashing a tirade about Trapp's sabotage, malicious intent. He listened, nodding slowly. Then he walked over to me. Ethan, you got those documents you mentioned last week? Sure do. I handed him a folder photos of the new sign's time-stamped video stills, the plat map from Cliff, a letter from Rachel Brannigan, confirming my right to manage and modify the land for agricultural purposes. He flipped through, whistled low. Well, Miss Bloom, he said after a moment, I hate to say it, but Mr. McAllister's within his rights. This is private land, marked, managed. You drove past several posted warnings. But it's a trap, she sputtered. It's a setup. It's a Ranch Rollins corrected gently. Not a public road, and you've been warned multiple times. Just then a battered tow truck arrived, the driver stepping out and eyeing the scene with amused detachment. Gonna be a tricky pull, he muttered. That bog's got teeth. As he hooked up the winch and began the slow, groaning process of dragging Vanessa's pride and joy free, I walked back to my truck. Vanessa glared at me like I'd just burned down her country club. This isn't over, she hissed. I smiled, tipped my hat. For your sake, I sure hope it is. Word spread quickly. Within 48 hours, the HOA inbox lit up with chatter. My trail cam footage somehow made its way to a few sympathetic residents. The HOA board held an emergency meeting, and the very next day, Gregory Trent released an official memo. Residents are not authorized to use any paths crossing Sagebrush Hollow Ranch. All trespassing is strictly prohibited. Violators assume full liability for damage or legal action. No names mentioned, but everyone knew. Vanessa's pristine reputation, once polished as her SUV took a public nosedive. Her neighbors began keeping their distance. Her invitations got fewer. Her shortcut was permanently closed. A week later, a letter arrived from a local law firm, Vanessa Bloom versus Ethan McAllister, Small Claims Court, alleging willful damage to her property, emotional distress, and negligent land maintenance. Rachel Brannigan nearly laughed out loud. Let's bury her in facts, she said, and we did. At the hearing, Vanessa presented blurry phone photos of her car's undercarriage and ranted about booby traps. Rachel calmly handed the judge our packet-color photographs, time-stamped footage, signed documentation, and statements from Cliff and the sheriff. The judge flipped through, raised one eyebrow, then looked at Vanessa. Ma'am, she said flatly, you drove onto clearly marked private property. This is not a public road. Your case is dismissed with prejudice. And just like that, it was over. I returned to Sagebrush Hollow that evening with a quiet sense of triumph. Not smugness, not gloating, just peace. The road began healing. The thorn bushes thickened, the manure decayed into rich soil, and my land stood strong, defended not by anger, but by patience, planning, and just enough bite to remind folks where the fence line stood. Sometimes justice doesn't come with flashing lights or a courtroom gavel. Sometimes it looks like a stuck SUV, a muddy boot, and a very long walk back to where you came from. The story of Ethan McAllister and Vanessa Bloom is more than just a cautionary tale about property lines and HOA arrogance. It's a testament to the power of patience, preparation, and standing your ground with dignity. Ethan didn't fight fire with fire. He didn't escalate the conflict with rage or retaliation. Instead, he used wisdom, the law, and a deep understanding of his rights to protect what was rightfully his. That's the lesson here. You don't have to be loud to be strong. Sometimes the most powerful form of resistance is quiet, deliberate, and backed by truth. In today's world where entitlement often goes unchecked and boundaries are regularly ignored, whether physical, social, or moral, it's easy to feel like playing by the rules means you'll be left behind. But this story reminds us that principle still matters, that doing things the right way, even when it's harder or takes longer, still wins in the end. So what can we take from Ethan's experience? Know your rights. Whether it's your property, your name, or your dignity, educate yourself. And don't let others steamroll over what belongs to you. Document everything. When you're dealing with repeated violations, don't rely on memory or emotion. Build a case that speaks louder than opinion. Stay calm under pressure. Emotional outbursts may feel satisfying in the moment, but restraint backed by reason and evidence goes a lot further, especially in courtrooms and community meetings. Be creative, but stay legal. Ethan didn't set traps, he set boundaries. He worked with the land and the law, and that made all the difference. And above all, protect your peace. Whether you own 100 acres or a small apartment, your space, your values, and your peace of mind are worth defending. At U.S. Justice Story, we believe in telling stories that don't just entertain, but empower. If this story made you think of your own experiences with unfair treatment, neighborhood drama, or standing up for yourself in quiet, strategic ways, we'd love to hear about it in the comments below. Thank you for watching, for listening, and for being part of a community that values fairness, accountability, and smart resistance. Don't forget to subscribe, and until next time, stay strong, stay sharp, and never be afraid to build a fence, especially when you need to remind someone where the line is.